I used to think silence was peace. But this morning, as I stood in my glass-walled office overlooking downtown Chicago, the quiet felt heavier than ever. My assistant had just stepped out, leaving me alone with the faint hum of the city below and the soft ping of my phone vibrating on the desk. I glanced at the screen, a message from an unknown number. But I didn't need to open it to know. The way my stomach twisted told me everything. I hadn't heard from them in almost 8 years. Mom. My son Ethan's voice echoed from the doorway, breaking the spell. He was 7 now, with messy chestnut hair and the same dimple I used to have before life wore it away. Grandma says she wants to see me. She found me on Facebook. I froze. For a moment, the scent of my morning coffee turned bitter in my throat. My mother, the woman who walked out of the hospital room the day Ethan was born, wanted to see him now? After all this time? I brushed my silk sleeve as if I could smooth away the tremor in my hands. Ethan, honey, I said gently, we'll talk about that later. He nodded and skipped away, humming a tune I didn't recognize. The sound faded, leaving me alone again. Just me, the phone, and a text I wasn't sure I was ready to read. My heart raced, because I knew once I opened it, the past I'd buried so carefully was about to come back to life. 8 years ago, the world smelled like antiseptic and fear. I remember gripping the edge of the hospital bed as another contraction tore through me, sweat slicking my forehead. The nurse kept saying, "You're doing great, Emily," but all I could think about was the shouting in the hallway. It wasn't supposed to be like this. My parents were supposed to be in the room, holding my hand, waiting to meet their grandson. Instead, my brother Ryan's voice sliced through the sterile air. "She owes me, Mom. 60,000, she promised." My father's reply came, sharp and low. "Emily, if you don't help your brother, don't expect us to be around when you need family." I was in labor and they were talking about money. My father's investment had gone bad, Ryan's business was collapsing, and somehow it had become my responsibility to save them. I told them I couldn't. The money I had saved was for my baby, for rent, diapers, the doctor bills. But they didn't want to hear that. The door opened, and my mother stepped in, her expression hard, lips pressed tight. "Emily, think carefully," she said coldly. "Ryan's your brother. Family comes first." I tried to speak, but another contraction hit, sharp, blinding. "Mom, please, I can't right now." "You can't," she snapped. "Or you won't." That was the last thing she said before turning her back and walking out with my father. I remember the sound of her heels echoing down the hall. It wasn't just footsteps. It was the sound of my world breaking. A nurse named Clara squeezed my hand then, her eyes kind but sad. "Honey," she whispered, "sometimes the family we're born into isn't the one that deserves us." When Ethan's first cry filled the room, I was both whole and shattered. I looked down at him, this tiny, perfect human, and promised I would never let him feel the kind of rejection I just did. Later that night, as I rocked him to sleep, Clara came in and left something on the nightstand, a small silver bracelet with the words, "Keep going," engraved inside. I still remember how it caught the light, delicate, but unbreakable, just like I had to become. The first few months after Ethan was born felt like a blur of sleepless nights and quiet tears. I'd moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the south side of Chicago, the kind where the walls hummed with the sound of old machines and dreams trying to stay alive. I had no family, no savings left, and no idea what came next. But every night, when Ethan fell asleep, I'd look at the silver bracelet on my wrist, "Keep going." Those 2 words became my prayer, my armor, my caffeine. I started small. A customer at the cafe, where I waitressed, mentioned her company needed help managing invoices. I didn't know much, but I offered to learn. I watched free tutorials at night, practiced with trial software while Ethan slept beside me, and somehow made it work. Within months, I was freelancing for small businesses, bookkeeping, emails, schedules, anything that could be done from my laptop. That's when I met Linda Carson, my first real mentor. She was one of my clients, a sharp, silver-haired woman who ran a home staging business. She had that old money grace, but none of the arrogance. One day, after a meeting, She looked at me over her glasses and said, "Emily, you have something rare. Hunger without bitterness. Don't lose that." She helped me refine my skills, taught me how to pitch clients, and even gave me a corner in her office to work from. I'd bring Ethan with me sometimes. He'd sit quietly in the corner coloring while I typed proposals. Linda would wink at him and whisper, "Your mom's going places, kiddo." Still, it wasn't easy. There were nights I cried in the shower so Ethan wouldn't hear, times when rent was late, or when my old laptop froze mid-project. But every time I thought I couldn't do it, I'd trace the bracelet on my wrist and whisper, "Keep going." By the time Ethan turned 4, I had built my own small agency, Northbridge Solutions. It started as just me, but soon I had 2 freelancers, then 5. We offered virtual support, design, marketing, anything small businesses needed to grow. When my parents' names popped up on social media, I ignored them. I kept my life modest online, photos of Ethan at the park, coffee cups, sunsets, nothing that hinted at success. Let them think I was struggling. I didn't owe them proof. Then one day, Linda retired and handed me her client list. "You've earned it," she said, pressing an envelope into my hand. Inside was a check, a business loan, interest-free, for the woman who never stopped moving. That was the day Northbridge became more than survival. It became power. 5 years later, my company had a downtown office, a full staff, and clients nationwide. But even then, I never took off the bracelet. Because success didn't erase the memory of who walked away. It happened on an ordinary Thursday, the kind of day that starts with emails, meetings, and a to-do list that never ends. I was sitting in my office, reviewing quarterly numbers, when my assistant buzzed in. "Emily, there's a couple here asking for you. They say they're your parents." My hand froze mid-signature. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "My parents?" "Yes, ma'am. They don't have an appointment." My heart started pounding, the kind of pulse that lives in your throat. "Send them in," I said, though my voice barely sounded like mine. The door opened and there they were. My father looked smaller than I remembered, his posture bent, his hair thinner, his once commanding presence replaced by hesitation. My mother still wore pearls, but her face carried deep lines carved by time and, maybe, regret. "Emily," she said softly, as if the word itself might shatter. I stayed seated.
"Mom."
"Dad." They looked around the office, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the polished wood desk, the framed awards on the wall. My company logo, Northbridge Solutions, gleamed behind me in brushed gold. My mother's eyes widened. "You built all this?" I leaned back in my chair, forcing a calm smile.
"Yes."
"Every inch of it." My father cleared his throat. "We didn't realize you were doing so well. I didn't realize you cared." The words slipped out before I could soften them. A long silence hung between us. My mother fiddled with her handbag. "Your brother, Ryan, is in trouble," she began carefully. "He made some bad investments. He could lose everything." Of course. Ryan. It was always Ryan. I folded my hands. "And why are you here telling me this?" Her eyes darted away. "He needs help, Emily. 60,000 could get him back on his feet. We thought, after all these years." I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. 60,000. The same number you asked for while I was in labor? My father's face went red. That was different. "No," I said, standing now. "That was the moment you chose him over me. Over your daughter. Over your grandson. You walked out on me when I needed you most. And now you're back because you need me." The room went still. Only the faint buzz of a city filled the space. My mother's voice cracked. "We made mistakes, Emily. We were scared." I cut her off.
"No."
"You were selfish. And now you're scared of losing what's left of your pride." She looked down, tears welling. My father just stared at the floor, silent. Then the door burst open. Ethan, now 7, ran in holding his sketchbook.
"Mom."
"Look." I drew our office. He froze when he saw them. My mother blinked back tears. "Ethan, you've grown so much." He looked at me confused. "Are they?" "Yes," I said quietly. "These are your grandparents." For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavy with all the things that could never be undone. My father finally said, "Emily, we just need a chance to fix things. We're family." I looked at Ethan, his innocent eyes watching, waiting for my answer. Then I turned back to them. "Family isn't who demands from you when you're bleeding," I said softly. "It's who stands beside you when you're broken." Their faces fell. But I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. "Sit down," I said at last. "We're going to have a conversation, but this time on my terms." They obeyed quietly, and as they sat across from me in the office they once thought I'd never have, I felt something shift. For the first time, I wasn't the abandoned daughter. I was the woman in control, calm, steady, and finally seen. I took a slow breath, letting the silence linger. The old version of me, the one who used to shrink under their judgment, would have filled the space with apologies.
But not anymore.
"I know why you're here," I said finally, folding my hands on the desk. "You want my help, and maybe you'll get it, but not without conditions." My mother's voice trembled. "Conditions?" "Yes," I replied evenly. "Because forgiveness without accountability is just permission to hurt me again." My father frowned but didn't speak. I turned first to him. "Dad, when you walked out of that hospital, you didn't just abandon me. You abandoned your grandson. You've never called, never sent a card, never asked how he was doing. If you want me to help, you're going to have to earn that title back." He looked stunned.
How?
"You're going to spend time with Ethan. Not as some half-hearted gesture, but real time. You'll take him fishing, help with his science projects, whatever it takes. But you'll show up. Every week. No excuses." He nodded slowly, eyes glassy. "I can do that." Then I turned to my mother. She tried to hold my gaze, but her hands twisted the hem of her sleeve. "Mom, I don't need your approval anymore," I said softly. "But Ethan deserves a grandmother who loves without conditions. So, if you want a relationship with us, you'll stop pretending we're strangers when people ask about me. You'll stop rewriting history to make yourself feel better." She opened her mouth to protest, then stopped. A tear slid down her cheek. "You're right," she whispered. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want a chance to make it right." I nodded. "Then prove it. Actions. Not words." Finally, I addressed Ryan, the ghost in every conversation. "As for my brother," I said, meeting both their eyes, "I'll help him, but not with cash. I'll give him a job. Junior analyst at my company. Entry level. He'll earn every dollar himself. And if he quits, that's on him." My father blinked. "You'd really hire him?"
Yes.
"Because I don't want revenge. I want responsibility. If he's willing to work, he can rebuild." For a long moment, none of them spoke. The city outside buzzed beneath the skyline, the soft hum of life moving on, just as I had. Then my mother reached across the desk, hesitant. "You've become so strong, Emily. I don't even recognize the girl we left behind." I met her eyes. "That's because she doesn't exist anymore." There was pain in that truth, but also peace. I'd spent years chasing their love, trying to prove my worth. Now they were sitting in my office, asking for a chance to stay in my life. And I wasn't saying no. I was setting the rules. As they left, Ethan ran up to me, slipping his small hand into mine. "Mom," he whispered, "does this mean they're staying?" I smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Maybe. But only if they learn what love really means." Over the next few months, the air around my life began to soften. It wasn't a fairy tale, forgiveness never is, but there were small shifts that felt real. My father started showing up on Saturdays, just like I asked. At first, Ethan was shy, unsure of the man who called himself Grandpa. But one weekend, I watched them from the kitchen window, Ethan laughing as my father showed him how to cast a fishing line into the small lake near our house. The sound of that laughter cracked something open in me. Maybe people could change, even if just a little. My mother began calling every Sunday. At first, the conversations were awkward, heavy with silence. But then she started asking about Ethan's school projects, about my work, about how I was feeling. She even came to his school recital one evening, sitting quietly in the back row. When Ethan spotted her and waved, she smiled through tears. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when I had to remind myself why I set those boundaries, moments when old wounds ached like phantom pain. But each time, I'd glance down at the silver bracelet on my wrist. Keep going. One evening, after putting Ethan to bed, I found that bracelet glinting under the warm lamplight. The edges had dulled over time, but the engraving was still clear. I turned in my fingers and thought of Clara, the nurse who gave it to me. I wondered if she ever knew what that small act of kindness had started. Because that bracelet didn't just remind me to survive. It reminded me to rise. Now, as I stood by the window of my home, the same skyline outside but a different woman inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. My parents were trying, Ethan was thriving, and for the first time, I wasn't defined by what I'd lost. I whispered softly into the night, "We made it, baby. We really made it." And maybe somewhere deep inside, I forgave them. Not for them, but for me. Because holding on to anger kept me tied to the girl they abandoned. Letting go meant I could finally live as the woman I'd become. I clasped the bracelet back on my wrist and smiled. "Family isn't blood," I said quietly. "It's the ones who choose to stay." The city lights shimmered back, as if agreeing. And for the first time, the silence felt like peace again. Bottom of form.